Hello, this is 2020 Church, and I'm Pastor Larry Enriquez. Hey, we're back here in the Gospel according to Mark. I like that we're going through this book. You know, it seems like for a while I've been a little more thematic in my Sunday sermons, so it's nice to be going through a book. This is, again, a pivotal moment in the Gospel of Mark because it's kind of the halfway point, and there really is a change in the movement of the gospel account and the workings of Christ. And up to this point, we have, of course, miracles, signs. Things are becoming revelatory through sermons that he teaches, parables, etc. And then we move to this, what I might call a darker kind of darker yet brighter. It's kind of hard. It's the mystery is this dual thing, the reality of an eventual crucifixion, the darkness of that, and the dark thread of the demonic movement that is following Jesus up to the cross, and yet the brilliance of who Jesus is, the revelation of who he is as the Son of God, the brilliance of the glory of God now in the flesh. And that starts to manifest itself in a different way here going forward in the last half of this book. So for whatever that's worth, we're here in Mark chapter 9. And we've just left the healing. Remember the spitting in the eye of the healings that Jesus has done using his spittle. We went over that last week. And Peter's confession. And then, again, here's that, if I can call it the darkness, but it's the cross. That is, speaking of, Jesus spoke of his prediction of his suffering and his death, that even up to the point did they really understand or get. And even those of us looking back, we love Jesus. We've received the fact that he has died in our place. But the fact that we have a Messiah who came to suffer and to die is not what the world wanted. It's only what the world needed. And so it's hard to take that we have a suffering Messiah, a suffering Savior. But we can't speak about suffering without the reality of what comes after that, which is redemption. We can't talk about death except that we can with the reality of the resurrection. So that's the contrast of the dark thread and also the thread of justice and then the glory of what comes from that. And so we're in that mode as Jesus comes to this place, as we would call the Transfiguration, a revelation of the glory of Jesus that is reflecting the glory of God in Exodus chapter, I think it's 33, where it speaks of Moses and his interaction with God and his going up to Mount Sinai and God revealing himself to Moses in such a way that as much as Moses wanted to see God, God says, if you see me face to face, you'll die. You can't do that. Until some other things happen in our human existence, Moses would be apparently obliterated in some form. And so God is going to allow Moses only to see his back, metaphorically, his back, as he will hide him in a cleft, in a hiding place. And again, I believe metaphorically that God's hand is going to cover Moses to be able to see the glory of God in the revealing of God's character in the giving of the commandments. And all this is taking place on Mount Sinai. Now, why do I bring that up now? Because that Exodus, I might have said Genesis earlier, but the Exodus experience on Mount Sinai is reflected here in this Transfiguration experience that we're going to read here in chapter 9 of Mark. Now, remember that in Exodus, we have not only the revelation of God's glory, that it is so brilliant in this earthly exchange. But by the way, if I hold that thought for a second, it's always been in every religion that there's a chasm between the deity and humanity. And the chasm is bridged by a temple, a meeting place by which we uniquely gather there to experience the presence of God. Temples, tabernacles, churches, so to speak, buildings, dwelling places. And here we find in Exodus a meeting without the tabernacle, a meeting without the temple, where God meets this man in this way, Moses. And this transfiguration, it takes place, and when Moses goes down to see the people, that the radiant glory, the Shekinah glory of God, is so much on Moses that he veils his face to allow the people to be in his presence without going like that. We can stare at the moon because it reflects the brilliance of the sun, but it's only a reflection. We can't stare at the sun without burning our eyeballs. We sometimes, in certain eclipses, see the corona of the sun, or the aura of the sun, the halo of the sun, because it is just the outward glow of it. The brilliance of God is reflected on Moses in such a way that he's like the moon, except he's a moon that's too bright. That's just, again, my little metaphor of this experience. But here now in Mark chapter 9, okay, hold that idea, that reality of Exodus to this Mark 9 experience that I'm going to read to you now. And just prior to this, I don't have it down here, but the Lord Jesus says that there will be some that won't experience death until they see the glory of God. And now 6 days later, they're going to see Peter, James, and John are the ones who are exclusively going to see this transfiguration. And Peter, James, and John, it's hard to imagine what they saw. We will think of it, of course, in our mind's eye. I don't know about you, but I don't think of the face of Jesus or the face of God. There are plenty that have been drawn or given to us by actors to have a face of Jesus. I don't like that. I just like to think of Jesus as this figure that's beyond human, though he was fully human and fully God. But that they're with him. And this experience I'll now read to you. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was, transfigured before them. So there's this now otherworldly experience right in front of them. And it says that his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could ever bleach. It's again, speaking in the vernacular, they're able to speak about this glow in this regard, this brilliance, but they can't speak of it in the way that we might regarding even the lamp that is shining on me to do this video. But that there is this dazzling white. That's the translation of this idea of extra shiny, extra brilliant, hard to see white. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Again, this is very hard for us to to keep in our mind's eye, and maybe some brilliant filmmaker could do it better. But we have pretty good imaginations. We're creative, aren't we? Aren't you? I think we are in our minds. We may not think that it expresses in painting or drawings or poems or music, whatever, but you're creative in your own right, in your own mind. Your fears can tell you how creative you can be. We're creative. We're in the image of God. Creatively, let's think of this experience where they're watching from the standpoint of Peter, James, or John. Pick whichever one you want to be, and they're seeing this before their eyes. They're seeing the brilliance, the dazzling white of Jesus as he's met here in this place where they can barely look onto it. There he was, transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. The Shekinah glory is there, but they're the ones talking with Jesus. What are they saying? This is so beyond them that in verse 5, Peter says to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, or in the actual Greek would be tabernacles, where God dwells, or where the presence of God dwells. I like this idea of presence, by the way. If we were to read the story in Genesis, we would read about God's presence being there, and that's another many sermons. But Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And then the Bible tells us here in this parentheses, he says this, he blurts this out because he didn't know what to say. It is so beyond him. It's like, he comes out with this little statement. And then a cloud appeared and covered them. So as this is happening, and Peter seems to interrupt this meeting with this statement, it says that a cloud envelops them, which I think is part of the Shekinah glory. This is my son. Now the voice of God comes in the midst of this. It's what I believe is the brilliance of what we see. It's the cloud. It's all of that hard to explain and express brilliance and presence of God. And it says here that a voice comes from within this experiential cloud and brightness. This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. It's an exclamation point as to these prior, again, looking from the human point here that God has given us in his word, is that, I shouldn't say his word isn't human, it's supernatural, but from the human experience, that in these first 8 chapters, it's like the exclamation point, this is my son whom I love, pay attention. So I love that exclamation point to the rest of the gospel. Okay, here's who he is. He's shown you, he's proved it, as much as we can prove those things apart from faith, but that we can by faith receive this Christ as the one whom God said is my son. And here's what I think of my son. So you better listen. Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. So here again we are in this, what I would call, dark thread of death that is following Jesus to the cross. Now it's hard to grasp that in the midst of their time with Jesus, and he with clarity tells them of this, they still are bewildered by it because they have a belief about who the Messiah should be, rather than who he is. And it's hard for us to sometimes include any kind of suffering in this life as being anything that's a part of God's plan. But frankly, it's all through the scriptures and it's all through our lives. It's like I've said it before. It's very difficult to see any primary person in the biblical account, especially those who are in any kind of leadership, as prime examples to us who aren't in leadership. That's why they're there, to be examples. Is that it was through suffering that they're where they are. The most brilliant and wonderful story is the story of Joseph. But David too, pick him. So suffering is that part. So this is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. And they look around, it's only Jesus. And Jesus says, this has been given to you for a reason, without saying that, by the way. He just says, be quiet. Don't tell anybody about this story. Don't tell them until after I raise from the dead. Then they're going, what does this death thing mean? But they have insight. Why? Not so they can go like this, I'm special, I know more than you. No, because out of their experience, out of the reality of their being given this revelation by Jesus, they can help lead the way after the resurrection and bring sense where there only seems to be nonsense, because they've been given this door, this window by which they can see into the supernatural movement of God the Father to bring his loving Son to a place of death that will bring also resurrection, the gospel. So this allows them to make sense of that as it happens and afterwards, but it'll be hard for them. And then they asked him, why do the teachers of law say that Elijah must come first? They just saw, and by the way, they seemed to recognize who these characters were, that it was Moses and Elijah. Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come. He came in the place of the person of John the Baptist. The spirit of Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wish, just as it is written about him. So Jesus gives this offering. To be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? Because that's the way of redemption. Because that's the way of God. That his way isn't our way. His thoughts aren't our thoughts. But that they're clear and they are in line with his character, with the reality of our need for justice and redemption and resurrection. So then this experience will carry them forward and be in their hearts and in their minds to strengthen them, to remember that the creator of all creation has said, this is my son. So there is this brilliant underlying hope that will, I believe, carry them through the mystery of the persecution, ultimately the torture and the death of Jesus. They'll have this underlying, but there is this Father who proclaims it's his Son who loves him. And they're going to juggle that. That's what I think. When they came to the other disciples for this experience, They saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. And as soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." So after this transfiguration experience, and these words and my thoughts about that I've just given to you, we come to this place, the next occasion here in this gospel, we come to this place where the disciples that remain, that excluding Peter, James, and John, that these other disciples are having to now deal with the fact that there's, a demon-possessed boy, and they cannot, again, extract the demon by their power. And so it shows the nature of evil and the dark thread throughout life. It says, whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. We may sometimes see life and put or add labels of science to it. Oh, look at, he's bipolar, or she's bipolar, or he or she's schizophrenic, or they have this disease. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's demonic. Sometimes I believe it's demonic. And we have to be willing to, as Christians, look at this world in a very supernatural way and know that God can heal, and that God can heal by removing demonic oppression and sometimes even possession, and that sometimes that is the very thing that we have to look at. And I would say that in other places of the world where we're not so scientifically or medically driven with labels, etc., that's more apt to occur. But we should not somehow put that as a secondary back burner. We should always think spiritually that there's demonic oppression in our world, and a demonic the demonic killing and mutilating of humanity, not just their bodies, but their souls and their emotions and their mental capacities. And so we must address those deathly things in our lives as spirit things too. It's never not a spirit thing. It may not be directly a spirit in some or many cases, but we are spirit beings. We're not just fleshly beings. Always we're spirit beings. And then here's the response. You unbelieving generation. He's not just speaking to those who are watching, but also to, I believe, the disciples who were trying to expel the spirit. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. And now here Jesus is going to reveal something and show something. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. I'm not sure what we would do if we saw this experience. Oh God, I hope no one sues me because I created this, prompted this. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. Call 911. We have all our various. Call the pastor. Whatever we would do. Jesus asked the boy's father. Very sad when you think about that. If you're a father, it's hard to think about it as how we would respond. But he's desperate. How long has he been like this? Jesus says to the father. From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. And there is, again, the telling of the demonic world. It ultimately wants to destroy humans. It wants to expel them, discredit them, shame them. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for one who believes. Here's this thing that Jesus says, that belief is important. Certainly in this case, it's important. You're going to trust God to act or not? Because that'll have a benefit or not. So I guess the obvious question is, are you one who believes? Not just makes religious a sense, but really believes in the working power of God in your life and through your life. That he really has an interest in the connections that we make and that we're given and that we're driven to do God's work. And hopefully we can instill belief in others to receive what God has for them. But you can't control that. But immediately, the boy's father says what we all have to say before God. I believe, but I'm ragged. I believe, but I'm broken. I believe, but I'm not fully who I want to be, and there's that thing in us that says I'm insufficient, where God works with us there in our insufficiency, in our inadequacies. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. So we don't want to stay there, and God wants us not to stay there. He wants to move us from unbelief to belief. But we have to admit the fact that we have doubts when we have them. And here's an important thing as to why I believe that the disciples weren't praying prior to Jesus coming and saying, you need supernatural work here to remove these kinds of spirits. It can't just be your strength. Here's what I read. When Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, I command you to come out of him and never enter him again. There's a little telling there. Can the spirit re-enter? Seems like that. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. You have to think in your own mind's eye, what did that look like? But it's violent. There's a real violence that takes place when Jesus comes and enters in. And there's got to be a real violence in our lives, a spiritual violence that says, I will die that Christ might live in me. I must move from complacency to vibrancy, that those movements are violent in nature. And then the boy looked so much like a corpse that they said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet and stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, Why couldn't we drive it out? He replied, this kind can come out only by prayer. They didn't pray. We have to go like this. It can't be just me. It's got to be God. I got to pray. That's who does the work. Let me close with this. In Hebrews 1:3, it tells us the Son, speaking about Jesus, the writer says, the Son is a radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. When we see Jesus in the Transfiguration, he is the exact radiance of God in the flesh, that now we can meet, that now we can have access, by which before the radiance of God had to be veiled because it was so brilliant. And now it is no less brilliant. It is even perhaps more brilliant, but it comes in the form of Jesus the Son, who contains that brilliance by which now we have access to God the Father. Well, I hope that this story and this moment in the gospel helps you move forward with a greater sense of not just who Jesus is, but our need to trust him, to pray to him, and to see the spiritual world that we live in, and to address it as spiritual beings who want to make a difference. Because God has sent us Jesus, his Son, the exact representation of what we need to live a life that's full. God bless you. Go in peace. I hope to see you this Sunday at church.